Welcome to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics that write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs. This is our 113th show, and I also want to thank everybody in the audience who's been supporting the show, because we just won the prestigious Communicator Award for the Best Business Minds. So I thank all of you for that. Today's guest is Marc Harris, author of Magic Dust. Marc, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you. And I really enjoyed your book. And I think anybody who wants to be an entrepreneur needs to read your book. It's very insightful. So let's start off with, please tell us about your professional background. And after you sold your latest healthcare facility, what are you doing now?
Wow. Okay. So from a background perspective, I was raised in the Midwest. And when I finished my undergrad in business administration, decided to move to Dallas, Texas. And I guess as things worked out, my first opportunity in the business world was working with a guy named Mark Cuban. And Micro Solutions was his first company at age 27. And I was 22 with the business background. And I started knocking on doors in a sales role. And that just developed into 6 years in computer electronics, and then finished a master's degree in health administration, and then spent the next 25 plus years in healthcare. So there's the background, more details to come.
Yeah. So why did you write this book? And I did like the title, Magic Dust. So why that title and why the book?
Great question. So Magic Dust is somewhat of a cliche to a lot of people. We say that they had the magic, the magic going that day. They had the magic sprinkled dust. The people always refer as magic dust as something that is almost mythical, but it's really not. When you look back at people that have been successful, or that people that perceive magic and dust as something that's elusive, if you think about it, it takes a lot of people to make things work. And in the book, Magic Dust, I wanted people to read the book and see and resonate with the book as them finding their own magic dust. So the stories, as you read, reflect on not just Mark Cuban of the world, but Paul Hirschman, and then on down the line to motivators, innovators, warriors, different types of people, all serving specific roles in the world and in the business world, so that we make our own magic dust. And if you look at your own role, you are part of the magic dust.
And I like that. I like that name a lot. And I was wondering, what's the process you went through to find your own magic dust?
Wow. As a kid, and as I reflected in the book, as a 10-year-old with a paper route, my first delve into being a business person in the first place, to deliver newspapers and get paid to do something. I didn't realize that those are life lessons, and from paperboy to computer electronics to healthcare, I didn't really reflect until retiring almost, where I sat back and I listened to the comment to people who say, "Oh, Marc Harris, you always have the magic dust. Everything you do, you're successful at." Or, "How do you know all these people like Mark Cuban, Paul Hirschman, Doug Dawson, on down the line?" Lots of good people. I mean, athletes over the years too that were special, and they had the magic dust. That's kind of where that started, and that's where it came from. So reflecting back, I use the magic dust as something that a lot of people, I think, have.
So I want to go down and talk about Mark Cuban a little bit, because he's a household name on a global basis, and your first chapter is on him. What was Mark Cuban like to work with, and what did you learn from him, and what makes him a great entrepreneur?
Well, when I was with Mark, I was 22, 23, and Mark was 27. So Mark's about 5-6 years older than me. And when you go to work with someone like Mark at my own young age, at Mark's young age, he was hustling, he was working, he was coming to work motivated, excited, But, looking back now, I can see how his mind was very similar to most entrepreneurs people. We were excited, we're motivated. Mark was I wouldn't say a total hands-off guy, but Mark was a leader by example. I mean, he'd go on calls with you. He wanted to see what was going on. He wanted to hear what the customers were saying. He was involved in the sales meetings. He was, how do you say? He was a step out of the box guy. He was already looking for niches or niches. And what I say to people is local area networks, LANs. Okay, back in 1985, local area networks were tying computers together and sharing files. That was a big deal because in our previous 10 years, we were in the big box world, the IBM world, where you had a big box and you had a dumb terminal. What you could do nothing but load onto your company software and do whatever they wanted you to do. And so you weren't creative where you have a personal computer. And so when we got into the personal computer where people were, I'm told I'm not talking too fast, people could share a Lotus spreadsheet or go into a database and share the same information with the 5 people in your department. Now, remember, in 1985, you had to be within a 250 feet area to be able to share the Ethernet. So it's not quite like it is today. It's obviously come a long way technology-wise, but sitting down with people like Mark, who saw opportunities like local area networks and making ourselves the #1 local area network company in the Dallas-Fort Worth area was a big deal. And going to meetings with Mark, you could see his mind always thinking. So, and he had a partner, Martin Woodall. Martin and Mark had, I think, about 8 people that stayed with them for the whole duration of their company. Microsolutions around 8 years. And I was only there for the first 2 when we went from the second year. I guess I wrote in on the second year. They had done like 3 million the previous year. I was there for the explosion when we went from 3 to 10 million. And I remember it because I was fortunate to have the opportunity to work with some big name companies like Trammell Crow and Lincoln Property and Dave & Buster, MARC. They all became $1 million accounts in 1985. So I was really excited to be a big contributor with Mark's company.
I was surprised you wrote, and I had no idea, that before his big hit where he became a billionaire, I think you wrote he was already worth like $350 million.
Yeah. So in doing the book, I worked with a ghostwriter, and she did a lot of research. And Mark went from the micro solutions world, where a lot of people don't know that company sold for like 20 million to a competitor, CompuServe, which is same space competitor. But I think Mark and Martin, after 8 years, saw the opportunity. It's time to go on to bigger and better things. And when they sold for 20 million, I think Mark Mark netted like 5.5 million. And that's when he's got his 5.5 million, sat at home and bought his American Airlines ticket, as they say. He spent his whatever, $150,000, $200,000 to buy his, fly for life ticket from American, and then sat at home. And then that gave him the opportunity to see things again, like the domains. Mark was into the domain world where he was, purchasing what he saw was like AT&T.com. He was buying that AT&T.com domain and then selling it back to those companies, right? And that was where he was amassing a lot of money. Again, being a visionary, seeing what people were going to want in the future and being a step ahead. Had created a nice chunk of change into the hundreds of millions when his friend, Todd, had approached him, his partner at broadcast.com, and it was actually AudioNet before it was broadcast.com. So AudioNet was the name of the company. If you don't mind, I'll continue on that.
I do, because I think that interests people.
So I was at an airport and I picked up a USA Today paper, and on the paper, it was Mark Cuban holding a laptop with his hand on the laptop and his big smile going, typical Mark Cuban with this big smile. He was pointing at the laptop, and it said broadcast.com, and it had the Victoria's Secret runway models. Okay. So when they did AudioNet /broadcast.com, the idea was to stream Indiana basketball games onto the laptop, so that the Indiana crew that Mark ran around with could watch the Indiana basketball games on their computer. Well, Mark, again, being a good marketer and smart guy, he says, hey, we got to do something that everybody or more people can get excited about than just Indiana alum. And so he put the Victoria's Secret runway model show on the laptop. Boom, instant success. And then I said, I hurried up and called my financial people, and I said, buy broadcast.com. And sure enough, within months, broadcast was sold to Yahoo for 5.7 billion, and Cuban and Todd each got whatever, 2+ billion. So congrats to them. That was a great story.
I have another question about Mark. Before we do that, though, there's a question from the audience, and not strictly a business question, as the person writes. Is it true that he invented streaming and that the first streamed event ever was his brother's wedding?
Oh, you'd have to check the facts on that. I'm not sure. I didn't follow him that closely when they started it.
What kind of culture was Mark Cuban developing when he worked with you? And what was his personality like? Because he seems to be pretty unaffected by his success. Seems like a pretty normal guy.
Yeah, that's a good observation. Mark, and I've watched him now for, since we're in our 20s. So he's 65 now. Let's see, I'm 59. He's probably 64. So Mark, and my kids and I, I've got 5 kids, and we still watch Shark Tank, and we love watching Cuban. They always go, Dad, I can't believe you're working at it. I can't believe you know him. And I'll tell you a story the last 4 years when I got together with Mark and one of my kids. But Mark created, he's always a high energy, positive guy. So, you always feel that charisma towards him, and you like to hear what he has to say, and he's good. But, he didn't tell stories. He was very to the point. We came in there, we knew we were having focused meetings. You talk directly about what you're doing. You don't talk about your whatever your friends and what you're doing last night and all that kind of stuff. It was wait, get to business. Okay. So I like that. And I continue my life like that too, where Mark's culture was, he wasn't a hands-on guy. He really wanted people to go out and do what they were going to do. I mean, if you were a programmer and you're going to be the guy putting on so for example, when we sold our computers to people back in 1985, 86, when you opened up your laptop or not your laptop, laptop or the desk, but turned on your computer, we had a menu and it said database, spreadsheet, word processor, right? Like that's all you had is a word processor, database, spreadsheet. And that was really important to a lot of people. When they turned their computer on, they didn't have to go into DOS, remember, their disk operating system, and have to put in what you're going to do or type in the program. You could just choose 1, 2, or 3. And a lot of people thought that was really cool. And that was something that Mark and Martin came up with, and they did it on all of our computers. So Mark was a hands-off guy. When Mark said, I was one of the 3 people, and Sally and Tony and myself, we were out in the field knocking on doors. And then Mark and Martin had their own clients. So when we got together, Mark would basically just say, I'd say, hey, a couple of my customers want to talk to you, like Lincoln Property and David Buster and Trammell Crow were big companies. They were national. They had offices, outside of Dallas. I'd say, hey, Mark, these guys are interested in putting these local area networks in Los Angeles, Minnesota, Chicago. And I said, I told them we could do it. We can, right? And Mark would come to the meeting and his eyes are all big. And they would say, yeah, we'd like to know if we can do the same thing that we're doing here, tying the computer, sharing files in these other cities. And Mark said, yeah, you bet. And so we'd come back to the office and figure out we made Scott Susans our on the road guy, and he'd go out on the road and he was putting it in around the nation. And here we were, just a little Dallas company going from 3 million to 10 million to 20 million when they sold it finally at 20 million.
How did Mark Cuban pick and develop and maintain teams? Like, what was your observations about his methodology for picking people like you and developing them, and then hopefully keeping them on board?
Well, I mean, I'm not one of the people that stayed 8 years with them. Obviously, I left after a couple of years, but and I'm going to tell you about what nice words Mark said to me 30 years later. But when I was there, I guess the people that were there, Mike and Tony and Sally and Rex, and I even remember them, and I've talked to a couple of them since then. And what they said was they really just felt like they were part of the team. They were part of the company. They were there from the beginning, and everybody took pride in being part of that. I was in a sales role and was recruited away from Micro Solutions really by opportunity to be like a regional manager for a big company. And so when I left, Cuban's like, Mark, we have a ESOP. What are you doing, man? You're part of it. And I go, what's an ESOP? That's the employee stock option program.
Yeah.
At 23, 24, man, I was like, what's that? I really
Yeah.
wasn't, I didn't see that as a reason to keep me, because I was just more motivated about the process of how things worked. And anyway, so when I've talked to Mike, specifically Mike Weiniger, Mike was there for the 8 years, and Mike just said, Mark, everybody just got along. That we didn't have a lot. I don't remember any. Well, the only what do you call it? Discussions that Mark and Martin would have. They would go into one of their offices and close the door, and it got loud. But then when they'd come out, Mark would have a smile on his face, goes, "Okay, that's what we're going to do." It was never just. They didn't draw lines and pick battles. We weren't doing that. Wasn't a lot of backstabbing. It was a positive, competitive environment.
And what did you say Mark said to you after 30 years?
So so my daughter, who's 25, we went to we're season ticket holders to the Mavericks. And when I moved back to Dallas in 2007, we called to get season tickets to the Mavs. And the lady said, "Hey, I'm sorry, we have a waiting list. There's no tickets available." And I just said, "Hey, I would just like to know if I could get on the rotation list." They had a rotation list where you don't have the same seat, you just move around. And I said, "Well, if I can get on that, that'd be fine. I'll start there for a year or two and then work my way down to get on the season tickets." Well, I said, "But hey, I hate to drop names, but would you tell Mark Cuban, Mark Harris is back in town, and see if I can, get on that rotation list?" And the girl called back about an hour and a half later, and she said, "Mr. Harris, yes, so Mark said he'd like to treat you to 4 on the floor to a game, and you can welcome to come say hi to him in the suite anytime, and you're on the rotation list." And I go, "Okay, well, tell him I don't need 4 on the floor, but I appreciate it, and I'll come see him in the suite sometime, and thanks, bye, click." I go. And then a couple of years later, I figured out how it worked, and I ended up becoming a foundation member where you make a donation for your seats. And then now I've been permanently on the 9th row and on mid court. Mark sits in the corner, so I get to watch him, but I don't run over and say hi to Mark. And 10 years later goes by, and my daughter Zoe invited me and said, "Dad, we need to go to a Mavericks Gala foundation." I said, "Okay." So we go to the foundation, and she says, "Dad, there's Mr. Cuban. I'm gonna go say hi." And I saw him, about 10 feet away, and I grabbed a big friend of mine, a 6'9" friend of mine. When I say big, 6'9".
It's big.
I said, "Do you want to meet Cuban?" He said, "Heck yeah." I said, "Well, come on, let's go say hi." So we go over there, and my daughter's kind of in line behind 2 or 3 people, and we wait for her. And I've got, his name's Colin. Colin's in front of me, but his back is towards Cuban, and we're standing and stacked in a row. And Zoe walks up, reaches out, says, "Hi, Mr. Cuban, nice to meet you." And he said, "Hi." She goes, "Zoe Harris." And she goes, "I believe you used to work with my dad 30 years ago at Micro Solutions." And Mark goes, "Okay, I'll bite. Who's your dad?" And she said, "Mark Harris." And he said, it's a big smile, he says, "Absolutely, I know your dad. Your dad was a significant part of our success. How's he been doing?" And I stepped down. I go, "Hey, Cuban, I'm right here." He had a big smile, and we embraced. And he said, "Mark," he said, "what the heck have you been up to?" And I said, "Life's been good." And he grabbed my daughter, and he said, "Let me tell you about your dad." He said, "Your dad was he killed it when he was with us. And I know whatever he decided to do in life, he would kill it." He said, "Mark, what'd you end up doing?" I said, "I ended up going into healthcare." I go, "I didn't do 4 billion, but I did okay." And he said, "Yeah, I'm sure you did." And we started talking about a couple of other people. And later in the night, my daughter had participated in the auction, and she bought the picture with the Mavs, to take your picture with the Mavericks, and they would autograph it later and send you a framed picture. So my daughter was bidding on the auction, and she won. And I happened to be about 10 feet away having another conversation with one of the players, Harrison Barnes, who's from Iowa also. And I'll just continue there. Harrison Barnes was from Iowa also, the state of Iowa. And I'm from Cedar Rapids, Harrison from Ames, Iowa. And he was talking to another gentleman, Colin, who played basketball at TCU. And he said, Mark, you got to hear the story. So I go over and talking to Harrison, and he said, hey, I saw you talking to Cuban earlier. That's pretty cool. And this is a professional basketball player. And I go, yeah, he's the same guy I knew 30 years ago. And he said, yeah, Colin wanted me to tell you the story about when he won a state championship 2 years in a row. They're like 87-0. When he got, they won the championship, he came outside and there was a limo waiting for him. And inside the limo, the door opens up, it's MJ.
Wow.
Michael Jordan recruited Harrison Barnes out of high school to go to North Carolina. And I said, that's pretty cool. I go, does he still take your call? He goes, he'll return my call. He may not pick it up, but he returns my call. I was like, yeah, it's a great story, right? Well, then my daughter's over there waving at me 10 feet away. And I run over there and I say, Zoe, what's going on? She goes, Dad, we won. I said, well, what did we win? She goes, we're going to get our picture with the Mavs. I go, well, how much did we win by? She goes, it's just a little over your 5 to 10 budget, Dad, you gave me. I said, what did we pay? She goes, 11,500. I go, oh, for our picture with the Mavs. Okay, well, when are we going to do that? She goes, right now. So we go upstairs and they got the photographers, everybody up in a big line, and they put us in the middle. And I'm 6 foot, my daughter's 5'3". So they moved me out of the way and they put JJ Barrera in, and they're standing next to each other. And they stick me on the couch with 6'5" Wesley Matthews, who now plays for the Bucks. And I'm sitting there, and after we take the picture, I stand up and Cuban puts his hands on my shoulder and he says, hey, y'all gather around, 30 years reunion here with this guy. And here he is donating 11,500 to our fund. And I look back and I said, well, I wish it was me, Cuban. And my daughter goes, it was me. And it's like she says, best night of her life. Great memories. And it was because of Cuban. Cuban was just like you said, just a down-to-earth guy, making good conversation, making it special.
So I enjoy talking about him, and everybody likes to get insights into the people they see to see if they're really as real as they appear on TV. So let's go back to your book. You broke your heroes down into 4 categories. Can you tell us what those categories are and why you chose them?
When I first wrote came up with the magic dust idea and what I wanted to resonate, with people, that everybody has their own magic dust. We went through about 20, actually more than 25 different stories of different people. We narrowed it down to the 19. And then we made a list of the characteristics and the things that I thought were important about the different leaders and different charisma and the qualities of these different types of people. And I said, what, if we broke it down into groups where people could identify better with, and that's how we came up with visionaries like Cuban, Paul Hirschman, like myself. We're looking to the next thing. How can we grow our company? What's the next thing we can do? What else can we do? Then there's implementers, which we all call those like COOs. These are your task managers. These people are the ones that want the list. These are your CPAs, your divisional managers, regional managers. These are the people who are task oriented. You give them the task and they make it happen. They get it done. And then you have motivators, which is the third group. Motivators, we have a lot of people that are motivating in a organization that are important because they're the people we come to work for, the people we like being at work with. They make it interesting or fun because they just motivate you. A lot of those are marketing salespeople to a lot of people, but I think a lot of people that are around the cooler, as they say, that are just people you like being around. Okay, implementers are a lot of people that go into their office and they'll just crank away doing spreadsheets and getting things done. Motivators are people who motivate people. And then the fourth group, and as you read the book, the story about my other daughter, Abby, who was born, and third day we found out she had meningitis. And she came to mind because I watched people like her, and we hired a lot of them in the hospital world that were a lot of techs, and even our housekeeping, maintenance, dietary people were challenged. And they were some of the happiest people that our patients, when they got discharged, would comment about on their, on their little customer satisfaction deals. They'd say, I really enjoyed the little girl and your dietary. I really enjoyed the tech that was in the therapy room. And Abby, to me, was one of those special people because she's overcome so much from her own. And then, as you read in the book, there's Tom, who lost his dad at age 6. And then Brian, who is a native Indian, who has kids that were college educated, and he was listening to him talk. And I was like, this guy was living on a reservation and taking us to the reservation while we're up there fishing. And then he's talking about kids that are college grads. I'm like, man, that's awesome. So I just wanted to be more inclusive in the book with the multiple different types of people, so people could resonate and see maybe that were they themselves qualified in any of those categories along the way. We're not all visionaries from day one. We've all changed or we've all grown.
A lot of successful entrepreneurs come from rough circumstances. How do you dream an attainable positive reality? I mean, you talk about that in the book. How do you, what's the mindset and everything that you need for that?
Wow. I was fortunate because my parents may not have been, they were high school dropouts, married at 16, 18. But so much of life is not really about where you start. It's like, as they say, it's where you finish. But I think along the way, your life is what you make it. You make the decisions every day what you want to do and where how you want to enjoy your life, or you want to complain about it. Do you want to go out and make things happen, or you want to tell everybody how bad it is all the time? And when you're poor, or you're, like you say, you're rough background or a rough start, it doesn't define where you're going to be. It just says, hey, we don't always all start off with what they say was a silver spoon. I think my mom and dad did a really good job of giving me an open mind to go out and think that I could do anything I wanted to. They weren't dream killers. How's that? That's the word. I think that as a parent, and we were talking earlier, one of the hardest things to do is balance, between being a business success and still being a good family guy. And I think that one of the things that I purposely have done over the years is to watch my kids, to let them all be who they want to be in the future. Not tell them what I think they should do or go into areas that I think are cool, but let them find what they want to do. I think you were talking about, you see Cuban on Everyday Life. One of my youngest daughter, Sophie, is going on 16, and she always talks about, Dad, Mark Cuban is on TikToks with his daughter. You got to do TikToks with me.
Uh-huh.
And I go, Sophie, man, and she's so creative. And I watch her as she, thinks about things on like TikTok. And I realized that she's uninhibited to think like that. And I would not have said, let's go do TikToks, because I want you to, do this for yourself. But the fact that she's doing it and she's not inhibited, and she talks about, like I say, Cuban's 65 years old, he's doing TikToks. I love it. It still makes you more normal.
Yeah, I think so too. Would today's insurgents of get rich mentality quick, especially digital currency, metaverse, what's your take on traditional businesses?
Wow. Good current event with the digital currency. When I watch digital currency or cryptocurrency, and I'm trying to get involved, and I'm actually an early investor in a few things, but compared to how we grew up and how traditional business is still done, there's so many relationships in traditional business. They talk about supply chain. You talk about long-term relationships with clients and the things that we had to do to keep those relationships versus the get on crypto, buy something, it goes 100x or 1000x, and we're instant millionaires. That's the problem today, that so many people don't realize that Traditional business isn't going anywhere. We're still going to have to go to the grocery store. We still go out to eat. We still drive cars. We still, we still like toys. We like boats and jet skis, and we still buy things. We still have to interact with each other. We're not just all going to do it on Amazon. Amazon's nice for a lot of people, but there's still things we still like to go out and do in person. There's still things we still like to have that relationship.
One of the things I thought was interesting in your book is that you profile a lot of people that are definitely not household names besides Mark Cuban. And when people were asked this question, I'm going to ask you, it's easy to talk about Elon Musk or other high profile entrepreneurs, but I was wondering, from you studying entrepreneurs and featuring so many of them in the book, what's the common thread that makes any of them successful from your research? Was there a common denominator?
Yeah, even though Elon is now diversifying, right? He's gone from the spaceship to from Tesla. Now he's going into Twitter. And Cuban now looks like he does all kinds of things too. And me personally, I branched out and invested in other things too. But that's not how we got successful. We stuck with one thing long enough to be good at one thing and make yourself. Jeff Bezos, come on. Amazon is his baby. The fact that he gets to do other things now is not how he became the billionaire. He stayed focused. I think that's probably the number one word, is to be focused. And I mean zero focus. Like I did not waver in, my first 10 years and look at other things. People always approach you with other ideas. And well, you're a serial entrepreneur yourself. It's hard to be good at one thing long enough. But if you stay with it long enough and make yourself successful, other things come to you a lot easier. Yes, but you have to be focused. You can't go out and what do they say? Be the the master of 10 things. You can be master of one before you try to be anything else.
Yeah, and it's easy to get distracted, especially today with so much flying at you, for sure.
Yes.
In the beginning of the book, you asked the question if people can be taught to be visionaries, and you wrote no. And I was just wondering why not, because most everybody will tell you anybody can be anything, but you have a lot of experience in this area. So why did you write no?
Anytime you're definitive when you say never or always or yes or no, sometimes you to answer no is the fact that there's so many schools and colleges now that teach entrepreneurship. Okay. And I guess visionary should be thrown in there as well. I think you should be saying stuff like, not just is he an entrepreneur, but is he a visionary? Okay. Because an entrepreneur so many people think they're an entrepreneur, and it's really, as Shark Tank, elicits, it's really a hobby. It's not a business yet. It's just an idea. It's not a proven concept. Right. And in the world of visionary, I think there's a lot of people who have really cool ideas, but they don't have a purposeful vision of how to get there, how it's going to get there. How am I going to get from A to Z? Not just A to B, right? But A to Z. How are we going to start it? How are things going to come together? How are we going to get the end result? How are we going to get a product? How are we going to get a service delivered? Where's our market? And we have to know all these things, where a lot of people just have great ideas and they call themselves a visionary. I think a visionary sees, when that comes out, what are we going to do next? Like Steve Jobs, right? Steve Jobs was one of the best visionaries. He saw something that people were going to want in the future that didn't even have today. And then he knew what was going to happen after he did the first prototype. He knew what was going to happen next and the next, right? That's a true visionary. And I don't think that that's something he was a dropout, right? Bill Gates was a dropout. Michael Dell, I think, was a dropout. These people were way ahead and visionary. And I don't think that in school, you go to school and say, yeah, I think I'm a visionary. I think it's something that is innate.
So you're born with that. I believe that too. What does it take to be a visionary?
Well, yeah, I wish it was something you could take and study and read a book and make you a visionary. I think it's again something that's natural. I think you have to. I don't want to say I did this at 10 years old, But when I got my first paper out, I think I had 25 or 50 people. And as I'm driving around on my bike, delivering the paper, I remember going, I don't know, why am I not delivering the paper there too? Man, why can't I deliver paper there too? That'd be really close to me. Next, within the year, I had 125. I had so the things that you see, you can go make happen. And I think a lot of people, number one, we all know 95% of the world doesn't see themselves owning a company or starting something. They're happy and they're content. And we want them to be great implementers, great motivators, and a lot of them are warriors. There's, overcoming a lot of obstacles. And we have to be aware that everybody has a purpose, everybody has a role, and we need everybody. We can't all be visionaries running around thinking we're all going to conquer the world, right? So I think that if we keep it where there's 5% that are visionaries and 1% actually finish the product or finish their vision, that's pretty much the odds.
I was surprised to see that Tim Cook is in the list of top 10 innovators by Forbes, because I don't think Apple has really done anything new since Steve Jobs passed. What's your take on this? Because I think of him more as like a guy who runs the day-to-day of the business, but not somebody who comes up and is visionary and develops new ideas.
I can't, I don't know Mr. Cook, personally, so I don't know how his mind thinks, but from an outside looking in to a company like Apple, they continue to do I think, then they do the Fitbit, then they do the watch, the computer on the watch. They've continued to do things. But man, a guy like Cook, who has just a huge monster to control like Apple, and to keep in the position that he's in and have this company still with high regard, incredible reputation. They still get the best of the best engineers. They're relative. They're someone that they didn't go anywhere after Steve. It's been a while. So I think maybe Mr. Cook's, vision might be his vision of keeping the company relevant. His vision might be just the things that he does as a manager. Like he might be an implementer, but he also sees the company and where it's going. He may not be the entrepreneur innovator like we talked about, like Steve Jobs is and was, but he still has some of the brightest minds bringing him ideas in his own company.
You talked about this before, and wrote about it. You had a paper route, which is many people's first jobs. What was the life lessons you took from that job that's helped you build the career that you have?
When I started writing the book, the self introspection that you have to do to kind of get deeper, and when I was fortunate to have a ghostwriter ask me a lot of questions, made me really think about things. And so simple things like the paper route. I remember her question was, well, was there any customers you really liked or people you really didn't like? And I was like, what a good question. But I was 10 years old at the time, right? And I started thinking that was a big question for a 10 or 11-year-old. But then I thought about the one person who I didn't like was Mr. Thurston. And Mr. Thurston was the guy who stood out in his front yard with his bibs on and his white tank top. And he was, bald head. He had his military tattoos on both arms. And he would sit out there with his bibs in the front yard, and he would be beckoning people, get off my yard, get out of the street, and telling everybody what to do. And he was also the guy who always said, I want my paper on my doorstep. If I can't see it when I look out my window, then you need to bring it to me. He would call and report to the newspaper. And when it was snowed or rained, he wanted it inside his little spring door so it stayed dry. And, I used to think, well, why would I remember that? Because he was someone I knew that the paper had to be delivered right, had to be delivered at the right time. Because he would report me. He would let me know, that I wasn't doing my job right. And so he was holding me accountable, at a 10, 11, 12-year-old age. He didn't care how old I was. You had a job to do. And this is the way he expected you to do it. And so I guess I learned that customers set expectations, and it's your job, if you want to keep that relationship, to follow them and to learn to be accommodating. Years later on that paper route, and I think I mentioned it in the book, when I was 13 years old, I stopped doing paper routes. I was into sports, football, basketball, baseball, wrestling, boxing, you name it. And by the time I was 13, 14, it was just too much. And I couldn't do the paper route. My mom and my parents were actually helping me do the paper route a lot. But 5 years later, between 13 and 18, I was driving by his house in my car, my 69 Chevelle Malibu, and had the windows down because the air conditioner didn't work. And I drive by and Mr. Thurston yells at me, "Hey, paper boy." And I looked at it, I go, "Hey, Mr. Thurston." He said, "Hey, pull over." So I pull over and he walks up to the curb and he says, "So you're the sports kid, huh?" And he's got the paper in his hand. He's hitting his hand with it. He goes, "You're the sports kid, huh? You're the kid in the paper." I said, "I don't know. I guess so, sir." And he says, "Bet your parents proud, huh?" And I go, "I don't know. I hope so." And he says, "So are your neighbors." And I go, "Oh, I thought, thanks, Mr. Thurston." I drove home and say, "Mom, Dad, you know, can believe Mr. Thurston?" They go, "That old mean guy." I said, "Yeah." I go, "He remembered me. 5 years later, he saw me in the paper and he said something about it."
But he probably taught you some of the best lessons that you learned that you don't even get in grad school.
Exactly. Exactly.
You work with an entrepreneur named Paul Hirschman. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Correct.
And one of the early outpatient clinic entrepreneurs. What did you learn from him and about the industry that interested you and about how to scale a business? And you need to give just a little bit of background on who this gentleman is.
Okay. Paul Hirschman was a drug rep for, he used to sell birth control for Johnson & Johnson before he saw an opportunity working in the space with some OB-GYNs, okay, obstetrics, gynecology doctors. And he saw an opportunity to move procedures out of the hospital to an outpatient setting. And that's why he uses the word all the time, early disruptors, right? And I was like, that's so cool. And I read about it all the time, what disruptors are. And that is, he was changing the flow of patients going to the hospital to have procedures and redirecting them to an outpatient setting. And at the time, you know, back in the late 80s and early 90s, when we did this, it was it was it was scary. The doctors were going to take a risk of doing procedures in an outpatient setting versus a hospital. Now, I say scary, but this is a calculated scary because the doctor's always in control. But we were doing procedures that were typically like I'll just call it a cold knife cone. Okay, that was the old term for a conization, where they took a chunk of the lady's cervix, and for the diagnosis would be dysplasia, and they would take a chunk of the cervix in a hospital. You'd have to be at the hospital an hour, 2 hours early. Then you'd be waiting for the doctor. The doctor has to be there an hour early also. Then they would usually do an anesthesia, and then you'd have the procedure, which took 10 to 15 minutes. And then you'd have to wait in the hospital till you recovered, till you woke up from your anesthesia. Doctor has to wait to leave the hospital until you're awake. He can't leave the hospital because he's got medical staff bylaws that say that that's the protocol and procedure. So this doctor has just spent 3 to 4 hours in a procedure that he can do in an outpatient setting in 15 minutes and roll in there 15 minutes before and leave 15 minutes after. Okay. So things like that, being at the forefront of that was really cool. And Paul saw more than just that. He saw dermatology with YAG laser, taking off tattoos. He saw all kinds of things that you can move from not only the outpatient setting, now you could do them in an office setting as well. So Paul was, again, visionary and creative. And when he says scale, he wanted to, if you can do it in Dallas, where the home office was, he wanted to take it nationwide. And so he wanted to make sure everything was duplicatable and was where we'd have to be, I'll say, continue to be creative. He wanted it to be a system, a process that we could be teachable and scalable.
I thought this was interesting in reading your book, and everybody needs this. A tactic you took to turn around a hospital you were working at was getting referrals, and everybody kind of lives off of referrals. How do you get people to trust you that you don't even know to give you referrals? Because that happens. And when you're in a startup, you know, you need to get people to trust you enough to not just give you their business, or that you've met them and they know people that they could refer you to. what do you say to somebody? What information do you provide? How do you follow up? Give us the methodology for doing this in a successful way.
Wow. Well, I hope the people that are listening and will get to hear this in the future take this as a notes. Um, one of the best strategies or the techniques, whatever you want to call it, was when you go to a customer, or in my business was in whatever the hospital world, where I go to a physician that is used to sending his patients to one particular hospital, or you have a customer that does business with a competitor, right? So the idea is you don't go and ask them to stop doing business with the other person cold turkey. You don't ask for a full switch. You don't ask for the referral to stop eating at their favorite restaurant, right? You don't ask them to stop going to the dry cleaner that they've been going at for 20 years, who they probably have a relationship with, right? So what you do is you ask them for a try. Give me one opportunity. You don't have to bring it every week. Just give it to me next week. Let me just show you what we can do. Let you see if there's a difference. Let you see if we don't deliver on the things that I say we're going to do. And I think that's what happened. I think I went to, I remember with Micro Solutions, I remember going to Lincoln Property in Trammell Crow. And one of the hardest things to overcome was someone who would say, listen, we already have, 2 or 3 vendors that do all this. You'll have to wait till our next, proposal cycle. I'm like, well, when's that? It was 6 months. I go, oh, wow. Wait 6 months and have an opportunity to compete for price? I said, no, we don't do that. And that's the other thing. We don't put yourself in the same boat as everybody else. Don't compete on price. Compete on what you believe is the benefit to the customer. And let them know you're trying to help them. You're trying to be on their side. And when you say the trust, that comes from day one. When I tell people I come in and talk to them for 5 minutes, I look at my clock, my watch in 5 minutes. I say, I appreciate your time. I need to get out of here because I said I'd be out of here in 5 minutes. Do what you say you're going to do. Build that integrity right away. And guess what? They'll tell you, obviously, in the first 5 minutes, no, it's okay. I got a couple more minutes. Keep going. Now you know that they're interested, right? Now you've already established some trust. You've already built a little bit of a bond where they want to hear more. They like what you're saying. There's already a trust. There's already some relationship, mutual. And I've read, and I'm sure most of your followers have read too, that people, what is it? Out of 100 people, 20 will automatically not like you. 20 will automatically like you. It's the other 60 we're trying to figure out, right? So, and we don't even know why people like us. A lot of people don't like us by association. Fortunately, I've heard more, and my kids have grown up. They say, Dad, everybody thinks they know you. Dad, they see you. You look like someone they know. Well, it's not that. It's because when people watch you and listen to you, and if you're a kind person, if you're trying to, like you say, emulate, do unto others as you want them to do to you, people will look at you and they'll say, hey, that Marc Kramer guy, he reminds me of this guy. He reminds me of that guy. Because why? They're trying to find other similarities between you and other people they like. But if they don't like you, they don't go, I don't like that Marc Kramer. Here's why I don't like him. They don't say that. They just don't know why they don't like you. But when they like you, they remember that you look like or act like somebody else. There's something, when people say, Mark, did anybody tell you have a twin? They automatically like you. So, and you don't say, no, oh, I don't know anybody. I don't have any twins. I would never know anybody in Philadelphia. No, you don't say that. You always follow up with, oh, really? What do they do? Where'd you meet them? Oh yeah. How'd you meet? Oh yeah, cool. So you immediately follow with that, right? If someone thinks they know you. So when the referral process was, I always just ask for the opportunity. I said, I came here just to ask for one. I'm not asking you to change your business. I'm not asking you to stop doing business with the other people. Just give us a try. And that's how it worked. And when I rolled into my hospital, and I think I told the story, when I rolled into the hospital in Louisiana, coming from big Dallas to a little town in Louisiana, and the 2 previous doctors that were the medical directors had resigned, quit working at the hospital to go work at a new hospital across town. And I rolled in and they said, oh, I just recruited from a group out of Harrisburg, right? Medical Alliance, which is now Select, the Hortensios, Mr. Hortensio. And I called him and I said, hey, did the 2 doctors quit? I mean, my first day on the job, 9 people resigned. And I was sitting there going, what? I'm like a COO and 9 people resigned. That's not a good start, right? And they said, oh, well, the 2 doctors already quit. They said all the patients, all 17 are going to be discharged in the next 10 days. And I was like, what? So I called Philadelphia or Harrisburg and I said, hey, what's going on? What happened? And they said, oh, they quit 90 days ago. We just been stalling them until we could get you and another doctor on board. And I'm like, what? So next morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, this about 5'6" doctor with a lab coat down past his knees, walking down the hall, and he says, he's an Indian gentleman. He says, you must be Mark. And I said, hey, he goes, I am Dr. Vesduva Dulipala. I am the new medical director. And I was like, I couldn't quite understand the accent because I'm, still 30 years old, young guy, hadn't been exposed to that many different accents all over the place. And he says, it's all going to be okay. You and I will fix it. And I was like, that guy today is still there 25 years later. Is still the medical director of that same hospital. And we went from 17 patients out of 49 beds, all being discharged in 10 days. 30 days later, we had 41 out of 49 bodies, in the hospital, and stayed that way, 80% occupied for the next 2 years. And I tell people, we didn't do anything special other than he did what he said he was going to do. He took good care of people, and we built a team of people that would do what we asked them to do. Just do your job, be part of the team.
There's an example in the book about being a perfectionist. And my own experience is that perfectionists take a very long time and miss the opportunity or just never move forward. Steve Jobs was one of the few perfectionists when it came to product design, but by and large, most aren't. What has been your experience, and what do you think about that statement about, perfectionist? Because I think you write in the book that you really can't be a perfectionist and succeed as an entrepreneur because you got to get moving.
Wow. So not to burst any bubbles, but some of my best employees and some of the best people that I know are perfectionists. They just keep redoing things. They keep redoing things. And I think the example you were getting to is paralysis by analysis.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what a perfectionist does. They will continue to just redo and redo and redo to the point where, they don't put it out. They're afraid to even show what they've done, and that's the paralysis. But some of those are the best people to have on your team as a COO, as product development, as some of your best task-oriented people are the ones that are the perfectionists. When they say something, they stand behind it. They're not just throwing out an idea. They make sure they back it up. And so I like perfectionists. I do see that a perfectionist would have a hard time running a company that in a fast-paced world, in a changing, evolving place. Steve Jobs, yeah, come on. I mean, he's still just a brilliant mind. His mind was just going. He's already got 10 projects. That's the thing. He's just got to keep putting them out one at a time, make sure. But he had people like Steve Woz that was with him that made it happen. He was the perfectionist who was a really smart guy who could make it happen.
Oh yeah, without Steve Wozniak, you never heard of Steve Jobs.
Correct.
One of the questions from the audience is, what is the story of his daughter and Mark Cuban in Shark Tank?
Oh, my daughter?
Yeah.
My daughter hasn't been in Shark Tank, but my daughter Zoe was the one at the Mavs Gala and was we talked to Mr. Cuban about when we worked at Micro Solutions. My youngest daughter, Sophie, we watched Shark Tank, and she is the one who can watch things. And she always says, Dad, why do I always like the things Mr. Cuban likes? And I go, because you think like him. And
it's not a bad way to think, right?
Yeah, she says, Dad, I don't like to talk like Mr. Wonderful with the numbers. She goes, but you know all the numbers. You know what he's saying. She goes, but I can tell you what ideas and what products that you should invest in. And I said, okay, Sophie, that's all I need. But there you go. I have a older daughter that's a licensed marriage family therapist. She's a perfectionist. Okay. But she does counseling for an hour at a time with families, and does a really good job at it. My other daughter, Zoe, and then Tanner, they're more like that. We're more creative. Let's go make it happen kind of people. Sophie is still the youngest, and she's figuring it out. And then of course Abby, she's my special girl.
So in your book, you were one of your employees said one of your best qualities as a leader is letting someone make decisions without you looking over their shoulder. This is a two-way street. How did you get employees to trust you that they'd be willing to make decisions without asking your approval? And how did you develop the trust to let them do it when many leaders feel everything has to be run by them? And is there also a dollar number or risk scenario where you say the leader has to make the final call?
Wow. That question's relative to obviously your business. The dollar amount is going to be based on, what type of business you're in, what type of volume in dollars you're talking about. Is your product, a car that's 30 grand or 50 grand, and what's their level of responsibility or accountability? The I guess the two-way street is probably the best way to answer that is it's two-way. You've got to feel comfortable that you got to delegate eventually. If you want to grow, you're going to have to delegate. And to delegate means you're going to have to give people responsibility to make decisions. And as a good manager, though, you need to live with those decisions. Don't come behind them and say, I didn't agree with that, and correct them in front of people. No, you pull them aside and say, okay, you made the decision. Now we're going to have to figure out how to change it. But you know what? Let's go ahead and change it and give everybody a reason why we changed it if it didn't work, right? And I'm the first to admit too, hey, you got to be big enough to own something that a decision that didn't work. You've got to be able to, like you say, pivot, come back and say, hey, we tried it this way. It didn't work. We're going to try it this way. And
But people have to trust you because they're afraid they'll get their heads lopped off. They could have been in other organizations where they tried something and they lost their job or they lost their standing or whatever. How do you make sure people can trust you that they know they won't get their heads lopped off if they make a mistake?
Yeah, I think that goes back to two-way. You got to have mutual respect. I think that I was very, very fortunate that the people around me, I had people with me in my company for 20 years, 18, 16, 14. That took time. People, they learned that I wasn't like you say, a hothead. I didn't fire people on the spot. That was not my MO. And as a successful leader, I think that you don't want that reputation anyway. You want people to know that you are going to make mistakes, because we all make mistakes, and you're not going to lose your job on the first go around.
Here's a question from the audience for you. Are you open to other speaking arrangements where we can reach out for more information on this? I can, if it's okay with you, I'd love to send your email address to them, or if there's an email that you want to go out, you could send it to me and we can make sure we make that connection. Would that be good, Mark?
You bet. That's fine. Love to.
All right, great. And so there are many stories throughout the book about the ability to be resilient, which as an entrepreneur is the most important word in your life. Some people panic when things go wrong and can't get up. They're so humiliated that they just don't want anyone to see them because they're so embarrassed. Can resilience be taught? And what's your process for overcoming failure?
Wow. Again, this is a personal that, as an entrepreneur, that's just part of your DNA. You are definitely a resilient person, because we know that we don't always, everything doesn't always work. So, getting up and restarting is just part of my day, my life, even today. Sometimes, when I talk to my kids and I'm trying to help them, but not giving them the answers. I want them to pick the wrong answer. I don't want them to pick the wrong answer, but sometimes they pick the wrong answer and I know it's not going to work, but I watch them go down that path. And the term is critical pathways. When people, they have to learn that when you go this way and that doesn't work, you go this way, you're following the critical pathways. In the healthcare world, you're presented at a hospital, you roll into the hospital, you have a cardiac arrest. Well, that's critical pathways. Boom, we have a cardiac arrest. Let's get the heart working. But then they also have other comorbidities. We all learned about those from the pandemic, right? COVID was originally a comorbidity, and not really the major diagnosis. It was anyway. So we have to learn to be critical thinkers. We have to be able to accept resilience as part of what we're going to do in life. that is building character. Character is just like in sports, man. We have to learn that we don't always win, right? Just because you walk the last batter doesn't mean you're going to walk the next guy, right? In baseball. And when you get beat on a pass pattern, you're a D-back. I was a D-back. Man, if a guy beats you one time, you can't think he's going to beat you every time. That's resilience. You got to know you're going to come back, and you're not going to lose every time.
Here's the last question for you. And by the way, you're probably a Dallas Cowboys fan, aren't you?
Season ticket holder.
What's that?
I'm a season ticket holder, and I've been a fan since I was 7.
See, I almost thought of not having you on the show because I realized, being a Philadelphia guy and an Eagles fan, that I had to really think, did I like this guy well enough in this book well enough to bring you on this show? So my final question to you is, today's 30-something strives for work-life balance, especially those of us who are entrepreneurs and our kids are following us and they're looking at us like, my God, that's insane how many hours you work. I don't want that. What's your advice in this area for people who are hoping for that work-life balance?
Well, that's the dream, right? We want to be able to have our work and do something we like doing, and then still be able to be the best parent we can be, or spouse. If you don't have kids, you still want to have a quality of life both ways. I think the pandemic brought people home. I think people started to wake up a little bit that, we don't have to run to the office for 16 hours a day. We have more people now at home than we ever did. Doesn't work great for some of us entrepreneurs that want other minds around us. We want that, but now we're learning to do exactly what we're doing right here today. We're doing Zoom. We're with a group of people sharing ideas and talking. And I think that the 30-something has a way better start than us older people did, because we always were used to face. And I think the 30-something today is more technology driven. They can have Zoom calls. They get the opportunity to be in their house, to be with their family, and be able to do work. So I think they have a 30-something has a new perspective, and probably a better perspective than we did.
Well, Mark, in spite of you being a Dallas Cowboys fan, it was a pleasure having you today. Because everything you wrote in that book was very practical, and it's relatable, because you're not talking about building the next Tesla. You're talking about things that everyday entrepreneurs are dealing with. And that's what made this book really a wonderful read. So we wish you the best of luck with this book. And when you come to Philadelphia, naturally, I'd love to host you for a meal here.
Yeah, well, when you want to come to a Cowboy game with the Eagles in town, just call me.
I will call you, and I will.
I'm happy to sit with you at a game, Mark.
All right. Everybody have a great weekend, and look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.